Thank you to my patrons and to our sponsor Bellesa for making this video possible, and stay tuned for details about a giveaway with Bellesa. Genius. We see a lot of variations of genius in today's culture. The evil genius, the mad genius, the creative genius, the Genius Lyrics website. But when we start looking at who's classified as genius, something quickly becomes clear. For example, Picasso was a genius, but Frida Kahlo was an excellent painter. Dickens, Hemingway, Joyce, Tolkien are literary geniuses. But Austen, Bronte, Woolf, Morrison, they're accomplished and talented writers. Kanye is a genius, but Beyonce is a queen, a talented and exceptional performer. Yeah, but genius? Not really. To be a genius, you have to have an almost supernatural level of talent and intellect.
Can you actually read that fast?
Yes.
A divine gift that elevates you beyond the rest of us mere mortals. Most importantly, to be a genius, you have to be a man. Because when it comes to women, we're not often geniuses. Talented, smart, brilliant, exceptional, but not genius.
Say, they told me you were stupid.
I can be smart when it's important, but most men don't like it.
Hi, I'm Ellen, and welcome back to Illiteracy. Year after year, we see men labeled genius and receiving prizes on some of the world's biggest stages.
And the Oscar goes to Christopher Nolan Oppenheimer.
Even for really collaborative arts like film, which require the efforts and creativity of hundreds, if not thousands of people, we hold up one person, typically a man, as the genius whose brain is responsible for it all.
I have so many people to thank.
They may acknowledge others in their acceptance speeches, but it's their name on the trophy. It's kind of like, I'd like to thank everyone who supported me and got me to where I am today. I'd especially like to thank the people who support me on Patreon and in return get some BTS bonus content. I'm coming to you from the Patreon beanbag podcast chair. We're a lot more chill over on the Patreon, as you can tell from this cozy lighting and my hoodie. In the Patreon video, I'm talking about everything that I kind of left out of the main video essay, things that I'm going to be including in the Genius one, like a little taster, and then like how the kind of video essay, how it originated and the different forms that it's taken, because it's actually taken quite a while. So if you're interested, pop over on the Patreon and I'll see you there. And I'd also like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Bellesa. Bellesa are literally giving away free vibrators and gift cards for vibrators to everyone who signs up to my giveaway. Bellesa are a sexual wellness company run by women. They aim to close the pleasure gap, which is the uneven frequency with which heterosexual men and women climax during sexual encounters. And I thought that their ethos of like leveling out the playing field fit quite nicely with this video. Their toys come in cute charging cases that kind of remind me of like the Totally Spies compacts, and they're just as discreet. And if you want to talk about genius design, two of my favorite toys that they sent me are the Pebble and the Air Vibe, and both of these toys have two different types of stimulation that can be controlled independently. And the toys don't have any of those like annoying pattern modes that you have to like cycle through when you're trying to get your rocks off or your pebbles off. You can check out the link in the description to get a free vibrator or gift cards for toys, because every single person who signs up to my giveaway will win something. So shout out to Bellesa for making cute rechargeable sex toys and for sponsoring today's video. It's a character type that pops up time and time again across TV, film, literature, a brilliant mind who's breaking new ground but who's isolated and he's misunderstood by his peers.
Don't you walk away from me. Hey, f you.
But a lot of these genius characters are, for lack of a better term, assholes.
You're obsessed with finals clubs.
Final clubs, not finals clubs.
They're often selfish, they harbor superiority complexes, they think that their logic-focused brains elevate them above the rest, that they're too smart to be bogged down by things like emotions.
You're gonna go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. It'll be because you're an asshole.
They're often loners and have crumbling or like non-existent relationships with friends and family. But when you think about it, it makes sense why these men act this way. They've been told for most of their life that they're smart, talented, destined for success. They've been shown either in their own lives or by people that they look up to that it doesn't matter how they act because their great achievements will excuse any bad behavior.
Put on 3 pounds since I last saw you.
2.5.
Well, 3.
They've been told that they're geniuses. And so have we.
Get out, I need to go to my mind palace.
For centuries, the idea of the genius has taken shape as a great man who breaks new ground in arts or sciences. But genius is not an objective label. You don't hit a certain IQ, win some artistic prize, or pass some test to become a genius, at least in public consciousness. Because the label genius comes with qualifiers built in. To be a genius almost always requires that you are a man and that you're white. But how did we get here? How have we come to pedestal men like Einstein, Da Vinci, Picasso, and Zuckerberg as geniuses? I want to talk about how our conception of genius came to be such a narrow mold and how the label of genius is so often used to explain away the shitty actions of men. This video is actually going to be one of a two-parter. This part looking at like the evolution of the genius, what constitutes a genius, what is excluded from the label of genius, and like how it pops up in arts and sciences. But I wanted to do a full another video because if you're an OG fan, you'll know that I'm a little film girly. I love film and I love cinema. So I wanted to also look at the myth of the great male director and actor in cinema and how this kind of fits into the genius myth, how men's status has been used to like explain and excuse shitty behavior. That's going to be another video. It's not going to be the video after this, but it'll be the one after that. But for now, back to the origin of the genius. To answer the question of how our conception of genius came to be, we're going to do a brief little dip into history, dip a toe, maybe two if we're feeling a little frisky, back a couple centuries. The philosophical idea of genius actually goes all the way back to like classical Greece, but we're not going to go that far. If you are actually interested in like the entire history of the like figure of the genius, there is a book called Divine Fury by Darren McMahon, and I kind of dipped in and out of that for like research and running this video. McMahon describes how the genius began as a religious figure, sometimes a guiding angel, sometimes a person who's like imbued with divine wisdom or acts as a vessel for God or some other like higher power. Geniuses were believed to be mediators between the divine and the human, specially chosen to reveal wonders or essential truths about humanity. In the 18th century, with ideological movements like the Enlightenment in Europe, there was a cultural shift away from religion and faith to science and reason. And in this shift, we can see the beginnings of our modern conception of genius. McMahon writes, "They were all employed to try to explain the greatness of a few great people, or should I say a few great men. It's true that there are some people who are like naturally gifted at certain skills or abilities. They might pick up certain ideas or concepts better. Some people are better at concentrating for long periods of time. And while there are definitely genetic factors at play, these things are very heavily influenced by environmental factors. For example, different cultures value different attributes or different types of intelligence, and what may be seen as groundbreaking and innovative in one culture or country might be squashed and completely discouraged in another. The same can be said of families or generations over time. A painter may have had fantastic abstract sensibilities, but grew up in early modern Europe and was branded as untalented for being unable or not wanting to reproduce the established style of the period. Class and wealth also play a huge role in the creation or the realization of genius. If your family is struggling to pay bills, if you have to work a part-time job, or you have to look after siblings, if you have to drop out of school to support yourself or others, it's very unlikely that you're going to have the time, the energy, or the money to foster innate talents. Just think of Nepo babies. They may be extremely talented in their own right, but they often reach success because of connections, because of their background, the values and encouragement that they get from their family, the skills that are passed down, the prestigious educations that they get. If art is something that's highly valued in a household, then that's something that's going to be encouraged and fostered. But if your family values science over art, then they're going to be less inclined to encourage your artistic expression or pay for art classes. And then your natural talent will go unexplored. And all of this goes from like the individual level of families to the complete like wider image of culture. And the notion of genius then depends on succeeding in something that your culture values. And so it should come as no surprise that because historically what we value in society and culture has been dictated by men, most often cishet white men, because they are the ones who have chosen what we value in society, they are the gatekeepers of culture. It makes sense that a majority of geniuses throughout history have been designated to be cishet white men. And it's still true today, but something interesting is that even if you do succeed in a like masculine valued field, you might not be designated a genius, and this is where things start to get very blurry. Can an athlete be a genius? Are Simone Biles or Serena Williams or Lionel Messi geniuses? Could a dancer, a ballerina like Misty Copeland be a genius? Or are geniuses only mental achievers? But then that becomes complicated because how could an artist like Picasso differ from that of a dancer? Is it something in the physicality or like the transience of dance because it only occurs like on a stage in a present moment? But then actors are helmed as geniuses like Daniel Day-Lewis or Marlon Brando, and their actions are physical and they can act on a stage. Where do we draw the line of what can and cannot be deemed as genius? I don't have an answer to that, but I thought it was interesting to bring up. Another factor of the genius myth is that they are loners and maybe they're rebels or revolutionaries, kind of breaking apart from tradition and forging their own way to artistic and scientific achievements. Whether they're artistic or scientific, discoveries and innovation are not made in a vacuum, and they're not made alone. They may be made in isolation, but every great thinker or creator stands on the shoulders of the pioneers before them. Frequently, like my example of a director of a film being kind of held up as one name responsible for an entire feat, one or two names are plucked out and held up as the sole people responsible for great achievements, even if these achievements are the fruits of great collaboration and cooperation. But that doesn't stop the genius myth from being spread through every possible avenue. Media and education are two of the most kind of like prominent or obvious avenues through which like the genius myth is spread. For example, what biopics are made, what works are chosen to be displayed in museums and galleries, what works or stories are included in school and university curricula, even what names pop up when you Google geniuses. And if you Google lists of geniuses, chances are they're going to include very little, if any, women and people of color, because the way genius has been defined has almost always been male. In 2018, 2,000 American people were surveyed to examine our cultural attitudes and conceptions about geniuses. 90% of people, regardless of gender, said that geniuses tend to be male, and the conception of genius as male has long been assumed to be natural. It completely ignores and dismisses the privileges and the factors that I outlined in the last section, and just assumes that men are more inclined towards greatness. The book Genius Envy by Adriana M. Pelienko charts the ridiculous arguments that have been made to try to justify the male nature of genius. The French physician Pierre Roussel, quote, correlated the moistness and softness of a female's organs, including her brain tissue, with mental inferiority. In his view, women were highly sensitive, predisposed to quick feeling rather than to lengthy reasoning, and this prevented them from being genuine poets. The naturalist Julien Joseph Virey followed a similar line of thinking in 1823 and described the female body as a cold, moist environment. Drier and hotter, the male body provided all the energy for procreation. Muscular weakness extended from the body to the mind. Virey linked genius to sperm and the phallus to the tongue, thus concluding that poetry was an exclusively male domain. Rousseau said that women were too wrapped up in sentimentality to be great writers. A contradiction pointed out by writers like Germaine de Staël, who set about separating genius from sex in 1788 with Lettres sur les écrits et les caractères de Jean-Jacques Rousseau. These ideas probably seem, hopefully, quite ridiculous to us nowadays, like the idea that a man's baby juice is the vehicle for creativity and innovation, but the idea that certain populations are predisposed to greatness still has a very tight grip on public consciousness. I only listed off a few of the doctors or physicians or philosophers, etc., who put forward theories that genius or intelligence was dictated by biology, in those cases sex, but the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries had no shortage of eugenics, pseudoscience, phrenology, and scientific racism that attempted to segregate people's intelligence and creativity along the lines of things like sex, sexuality, race, religion, class, and disability.
What is the bearing of the laws of heredity upon human affairs? Eugenics provides the answer. Here is a man who, although normal, comes from a mentally defective family. The remaining 7 children are all mental defectives. How has this disastrous state of affairs come about? If we examine the pedigree of this family, we find that although the father and mother of the youngest generation are both normal, the father's brother was insane. Once they have been born, defectives are happier and more useful in these institutions than when at large. But it would have been better by far, for them and for the rest of the community, if they had never been born.
Just think of things like how indigenous populations were, and in some circles still are, believed to be backward, as being of lower intelligence, as subhuman, as needing guidance from European men, and were colonized and massacred for their perceived uncivilized ways. If a culture doesn't even value a certain population's humanity, then there's absolutely no way that they're going to find a genius among them. There were widespread and widely accepted theories of lower intelligence for African people, which were used as justification for slavery and colonialism. There were theories that European Jewish people had higher levels of intelligence. This perpetuated stereotypes of the plotting Jew acting as a puppeteer behind society. There's also the opposite theory in the 20th century that Jewish people were feeble-minded and of lower intelligence. And hopefully I don't have to tell you what those theories were used to justify. It's pretty obvious looking back how these false scientific theories were used to devalue entire groups of people. And it's easy to look back and shake our heads at the notion of measuring skulls or whipping out the calipers to try to measure someone's intelligence. Everyone watching this hopefully knows that intelligence and creativity are not more likely in any one population of people. It's been widely studied and documented that things like intelligence and creativity are dictated by factors like socioeconomic status, access to education, nutrition, parental status, etc. And as far back as 1971, people have been pointing this out. Linda Nochlin wrote an essay called Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists? And in it, she writes, "The answer to why there have been no great women artists lies not in the nature of individual genius or the lack of it, but in the nature of given social institutions and what they forbid or encourage in various classes or groups of individual. The fault lies not in our stars, our hormones, our menstrual cycles, or our empty internal spaces, but in our institutions and our education."
The foreman?
Yes.
Mr. Donnelly up in personnel said for me to give you this card. I'm your new bearings inspector.
Give her to somebody else. I ask for a man.
Personality problems, aren't they really just a part of life?
Part of a woman's life, maybe.
Because access to privilege has been segregated along the lines of race, sex, sexuality, religion, etc. throughout history, the bias towards men of getting the label genius is still in place. And likewise, the contributions we value, the achievements that may render one a genius, are still wrapped up in social and cultural biases. Mark Anthony Neal, a professor of Black popular culture and African American studies at Duke, sums up this issue quite nicely in a contribution to a 2009 New York Times opinion page about Roman Polanski. All too often, we are willing to give artists the benefit of the doubt. when their art adheres to some innocuous standard of value, or when they've been constructed consumable images that suggest a nostalgia for a citizenry that we have never been. Thus, the druggy jazz singer or rap star will never get the same benefits as the critically acclaimed auteur or musical iconoclast, where it goes without saying, the issues of class, race, ethnicity, gender, and our sense of celebrity often color our sense of empathy. I want to do a little experiment, so just join me for a moment, if you will. I want you to imagine a female genius.
Who's that?
Female genius. Okay, I'll give you a second. Got it? Was it Marie Curie?
It's
Marie Curie? If not, props to you, because for some reason, Madame Curie seems to be at the top of everyone's list of female geniuses, and often the only one that they can name. I was looking through lists of geniuses online when I was researching this, and often, if there were any woman, it tended to be Marie Curie, or else if in the rare case that they included more than one woman, it was always women who had made achievements in maths and science, like chemistry, nuclear physics, computer science. And I thought this was interesting because there were obviously a lot of male scientists on the lists, but there were also philosophers, writers, painters, musicians. But when it came to the women, it seemed that the only way that their intellect, their achievements, their genius was valid is if it were in some kind of like quantifiable field. They had to succeed in the masculine worlds of logic and science. Expressions of emotion, creativity, artistry, and subjectivity are all feminine coded things, but the top celebrated artists, those deemed to be genius, were and continue to be men.
Wait! Who are you?
I'm a high-functioning sociopath.
With great genius comes great irresponsibility. In her book Monsters, Claire Dederer writes, "The genius is a proposition. He's a fantasy that we have collectively. The genius isn't so much a kind of person as a status of person, a person who can do whatever he wants." Wrapped up in the myth of the genius is the stereotype that they're eccentric, maybe even insane. Like, you can't talk about Van Gogh without talking about his mental illness and his severed ear. It's believed that the mind of the genius is too great to even conform to social norms. So they've often been excused from social rules and could indulge in vices or behavior that would have been deemed unacceptable from a non-genius. The psychology is at play today where we see people excusing the shitty actions of some great men because of the art or the achievements that they've created. If the artistic genius succeeds by breaking artistic rules, then who are we to apply societal rules to him? But how many rules are they allowed to break? Are they above the law? Sometimes, actually pretty often, yes. Amanda Hess writes about this for the New York Times. A proclivity for reprehensible acts is built right into the mythos of the artistic genius, a designation rarely extended to women. The art excuses the crime. The habit of treating artists as transcendent creators rather than as players in an economic system serves to protect them from typical workplace expectations. There's been a lot of attention paid to bad men in the entertainment industry, with the Me Too movement kind of being a culmination of this. And that movement did radically alter how we view great men and their abuses of power, because for a long time the attitude was like, yeah, these men might engage in abuse or racism or homophobia or anti-Semitism, yada yada yada. But it's only because their mind is too great for this world. These bursts of violence or abuse or bigotry are necessary releases in order for them to be able to make great art. Martha Gellhorn was a writer, and she was briefly married to Ernest Hemingway, a notorious bad man, and she said, "A man must be a very great genius to make up for being such a loathsome human being." She really annihilates Hemingway with a single sentence, and she implies that he, along with all of these other great men, must succeed in art to excuse their bad behavior, that they must compensate the world in the form of their art in return for being such horrible people. And their contributions must outweigh the suffering that they cause. She draws attention to this tension, this kind of balancing act between the greatness of the art and the badness of the artist. Along with Hemingway, Picasso is another great case study in how we conceive of this genius artist and how we excuse a lot of bad behavior, because Picasso may have hit a woman or two or three or more. Sure, he may have believed that women are either goddesses or doormats, which I guess is his version of the Madonna whore myth, but it's only because his unbridled passion overcomes him, and we can't criticize that passion if it gives us such great art like Guernica. Picasso succeeded in buying into this like genius slash great artist myth and reinforcing it himself. In The Success and Failure of Picasso by John Berger, Berger discusses Picasso's attitude towards art. He writes, "To the prodigy himself, his power also seems mysterious, because initially it comes to him without effort. It is not that he has to arrive somewhere, he is visited." This calls back to that like pre-18th century notion that the genius is a divine being, or that they are visited by divine inspiration, that they're a vessel for some like higher power. Framing it this way suggests that their talent can't be replicated. It's not the result of hours of practice or instruction or study. It's something that no other human being can replicate. They are unique. They are a genius. Another aspect of the artistic genius, or just the genius in general and like the mythology that surrounds them, is can they be a kind of consumable image? Like, can their persona, their history be kind of condensed down to something that is easily recognizable and consumable and purchasable? Can they inhabit like a poster on a dorm room wall? Einstein sticking his tongue out is a famous fixture of many, many dorm rooms. You also wouldn't have to search very far to find pictures of or artwork by Picasso on a lot of young men's dorm room walls. Another person who's framed as a genius, whose work hangs on dorm room walls across the world, is Kanye West. Kanye West has widely been lauded as a genius, but far from like shrugging off the title, he puts it on and nestles right into it like it's a Yeezy hoodie. He's called himself a genius as far back as his album Graduation. A few years after Graduation, in 2010, he released a song called Gorgeous, in which he says, "Yeah, what's a black beetle anyway? And addresses the racial inequality in how we celebrate the achievements of artists. But since then, it has been widely accepted that Kanye West changed the face of modern music. I think he is a fantastic case study in like how we conceive of genius nowadays. Fans have bought into his narcissistic, self-aggrandizing notion that he is God, that his talent is unparalleled, that his quirks, i.e. engaging in harmful acts, are just side effects of being a genius. And even in the face of his public downfall, many put his actions down to mental illness, which, as I kind of alluded to with Van Gogh, has long been wrapped up in the myth of genius. And it often acts as a way to dodge accountability. Kanye West has suffered huge blows to his wealth and to his reputation, but the sheer extremity that his actions and statements were able to go to before he saw any real like repercussions, you know, like saying things like slavery was a choice or denying that the Holocaust ever happened, shows how much we collectively excuse before drawing the line. Again, from Monsters by Claire Dederer, she writes, "When it comes to balancing the greatness of the work against the badness of the deed, the word genius simply breaks the calculator." But it's not just artists who get away with it.
Scientists, please. Looking for some order. Some order, please.
Science, a world that is supposed to be ruled by facts and logic, actually falls victim to the exact same patterns of behavior that we see in the arts world.
It is fascinating, really.
Lena McNeil wrote an excellent article about how our tendency to absolve men of their crimes under the banner of being a genius is not exclusive to arts and entertainment, but is very prominent in the science world. McNeil's article is called "Surely You're a Creep, Mr. Feynman," and is about the Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman. But as well as contributing to key concepts in quantum physics, Feynman also wrote a memoir called "Surely You're Joking," in which he reveals himself to be a serial predator. McNeill summarizes his predatory behavior. Feynman details how he adopted the mindset of a pickup artist by treating women as if they were worthless and cruelly lashing out at them when they rejected his advances. He worked and held meetings in strip clubs, and while a professor at Caltech, he drew naked portraits of his female students. Even worse, perhaps, he pretended to be an undergraduate student to deceive younger women into sleeping with him. This is not alleged. He has said that he has done this. He was and continues to be lauded as a great genius. McNeill writes, in 1984, People magazine called Surely You're Joking, the same book that recounts his adventures as a pickup artist, irreverent, and noted that Feynman's unbuttoned memoir, quote, gives nerds a good name. Sheldon Cooper in the TV show The Big Bang Theory idolizes Feynman.
One time, they tried to make Richard Feynman take a vacation, but he chose instead to expand his mind and learn something new.
And plays the bongos in his honor, which feeds into the larger adorkable misogyny MO of the show. The recent Nature piece casts him as a wild nonconformist. This type of representation gives Feynman's seedier side a pass, or in the case of the People article, even implies that it's something of a cultural virtue. McNeill also brings up some really interesting points that challenge the notion that, unlike art, which is dictated by emotion and subjectivity, science is ruled by logic, reason, and objectivity. And because of this, it is less likely to be corrupted by the behavior or bias of men. She argues that we should abandon the myth that we can separate science from the scientist. Because though it's easier to directly see the links between an artist's bad behavior and their problematic art, the world of science also reflects the personalities, the values, and the biases of the scientists. But it's only natural that the domination of cis-het white men throughout history and across the sciences has impacted the sciences themselves, like how white men form the majority of test subjects in drug or medical trials, how Black people were wrongly assumed to feel less pain, how we undergo what is essentially minor surgery of things like IUD insertion with no painkiller or anesthetic.
And I'd been told to take a couple of paracetamol and ibuprofen in the hours before my appointment. But my screams were so loud that my husband tried to find out what room I was in to make it stop. At no point was it suggested that I could have any anesthetic or sedation.
And with pervasive problems and myths like these, what McNeill is saying about the impossibility of objective science becomes clearer. Because even objective science is the product of a series of decisions that are informed by cultural values. Who we prioritize studying, what we deem worthy of research money, the makeup of study groups, where scientific institutions are based and who makes up those institutions, the people in power who grant access to all of this information and the ways that they may abuse their power. The science world has also seen patterns of men abusing their power and assaulting women, but these men are shielded by layers of their intellect and their scientific contributions, so they benefit from the same culture of protecting men and silencing women. And all of this is a result of pedestaling a few great men, of using their intellect as an excuse for bad behavior. And we may be more aware of these issues when it comes to more front-facing people like artists or entertainers or eccentric tech millionaires, but it trickles down to impact every strata of society, which is why we have to deconstruct this myth, to kill the idea that as your greatness goes up, your responsibility to society, to yourself, and to those around you goes down. We also have to dismantle the very idea of greatness because, as we've talked about, greatness and genius are heavily loaded terms that are informed by centuries of cultural domination by cis-het white men, the very people who continue to benefit from these ideas of greatness and genius that they have created. And this isn't just important because of how we view people that we have deemed to be geniuses in society. It also impacts our own self-perceptions. If we're only shown a certain type of person celebrated as genius or exceptional, we will internalize those ideas and devalue our own attributes or achievements. In the 2017 poll I mentioned before of 2,000 Americans, when asked if they might be a genius, 15% of men said yes, while not a single woman did. And another study from 2017 that was published in the journal Science examined the gender stereotypes internalized by children, and it showed that girls as young as 6 were more likely to characterize boys with brilliance than themselves. The study found that they may recognize that they work really hard, but they don't think that they are naturally smart. And this forms the basis for a devaluation that can continue into adulthood.
Next, this year's Nobel Prize in Physics. Gerard Mourou of France and Donna Strickland of Canada together developed a method to intensify laser beams in short pulses, which led to a number of applications, including laser eye surgery. Donna Strickland is just the 3rd woman in history to win a Nobel in physics.
The University of Chicago psychologist Lynn Bian led a research team that found, quote, despite the objective evidence of women's intellectual and professional accomplishments, it seems that their ability to make intellectual contributions is still not seen as being on par with men's. The same researchers found that women are less likely to apply for a job when it's advertised as requiring a brilliant mind. Men are equally likely, whether or not the job description calls for a brilliant mind.
You're only the 3rd woman ever to win the Nobel Prize in Physics, the 1st woman in 55 years to do so. Why don't more women share that honor?
When I was doing my PhD, there were only about 10%. If I went to a conference, there would only be about 10% women. And the last woman who won it was Maria Gabert-Meyer, and you know, she didn't get paid for most of her career to do her science.
People, regardless of gender, race, sexuality, disability, religion, etc., are talented, creative, intelligent, compassionate, but people can also be messy and complicated and at times very, very shitty. And geniuses are just people. They may do great things, but they're not untouchable divine beings. And by refusing to pedestal just a select few, we open up the possibilities to see greatness across a range of people instead of trying to filter them through like a Scooby-Doo-esque man-shaped hole in the wall. The question of genius is a very complex one, and I'm by no means trying to devalue the achievements of the great men that I've mentioned across this essay.
Pleasure and honor to presenting to Madame Curie the gold medal of our college.
This exploration into genius and greatness is very much like the tip of the iceberg. It's very much the start of a conversation. So I'm very interested to hear what you think, how you conceive genius, how you think about genius, who is the kind of the quintessential genius in your mind, and how does that fit into the long legacy that I've discussed in this video. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Please consider subscribing to this channel, maybe checking out the Patreon if you're interested, and I will see you in my next video. And a special shout out to Eric Danielson, who is one of my Elle Woods Patreon tier members.